The CCCR, or Centre for Creative and Cultural Research, investigates the ancient, innovative relationship between social culture and creative production. Based in the Faculty of Arts and Design at the University of Canberra, we generate scholarship and artwork in a wide array of humanities, social science, applied and creative disciplines. You are listening to a fresh presentation from the CCCR's Culture and Creativity Seminar Series. The presentation was delivered with slides. To view those slides, or to learn more about the Centre's work, please follow the links in the program notes. This podcast was recorded on the unceded lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples. Hi everybody, my name's Paul McGee. I'm the Director of the Centre for Creative and Cultural Research here at the University of Canberra. I want to start by acknowledging that we are here on the unceded lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. I pay my respects to all elders, past, present and future, and also to all First Nations people here in the room. Today I have the pleasure of introducing Julia Brand. Julia is a postdoctoral research fellow specialising in the application of laser technologies for the conservation of cultural heritage materials. Julia completed her PhD here at the University of Canberra in 2023. And that PhD focused on the use of femtosecond pulse lasers to clean the granite cladding of the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Following her doctoral studies, Julia undertook a laser cleaning fellowship at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, which is what we're going to hear about today. And that's where Julia worked closely with conservation to integrate laser cleaning into routine treatment practices. She's since returned to Canberra, where her research will explore the application of laser cleaning to Aboriginal rock art as part of the ARC Super Grant, Conserving Heritage in Stone. Please join me in welcoming Julia.
So today I will talk about the work that I did at the Victoria and Albert Museum. We did quite a lot of things, and I will show you different projects and also give you a little introduction to laser cleaning for people who might not know what is going on with that. So the Victoria and Albert Museum is actually a family of museums. There are 3-4 different sites just in London. The main site being South Kensington, which is where I was. And there's now 2 new sites at V&A East, so the museum and the newly opened storehouse. There is also Young V&A, which is more childhood type of objects, V&A Dundee and the Wedgwood collection. It is a little bit difficult to tell you what the collections of the V&A are about because there are so many objects that it spans a lot of different things, but the V&A is the world's largest museum of applied arts, decorative arts and design, and it ranges from fashion to sculpture. There's paintings, there's furniture and a lot of different things from different continents, Africa, Asia, Europe. So a very wide range of objects and materials, which makes it great to do laser cleaning because you have access to all these amazing things to work on. So the laser cleaning at the V&A is actually a long story on the scale of laser cleaning. So they purchased their first laser, which was an NdYAG in the 90s, early 2000. So it was a machine that was shared between the V&A, the Natural History and Tate, and it's this big beast here on the right. It is old, it is bulky, it is heavy, and is still working really well. Since then, they have purchased a smaller version, which is the Compact Phoenix in the middle, which is a laser that we also have here. I'm just putting that there. Which is way easier to move around. And in the last couple of years, they received an AirYAG laser from Ed Tepper. Ed Tepper is a philanthropist and a laser specialist with a strong interest in laser cleaning of heritage and in particular laser cleaning of paintings. And he's the person who funded my fellowship for the year. So why do we bother with lasers? There are quite a few benefits of lasers compared to more conventional cleaning methods. The first one being that it's a touch-free technique, so you don't need to actually touch the surface to do cleaning. It is precise, so if you have very small things, you can target them precisely. There is a minimized risk of damage. It is pretty gentle when it's applied in the right conditions, and I will emphasize on that last part. And a reduced use of chemicals or no chemicals at all, depending on which laser you're using, which is a very nice thing to have. So I'm going to give you a little bit more details about how it works, but very summarized. So you've already heard me talk about two different lasers here, the Nd:YAG and the AirYAG, and it's just different types of light that they emit. So Nd:YAG stands for neodymium yttrium aluminium garnet. You don't need to remember that. It just emits light at 1064 nanometers, which is towards the near infrared, whereas the erbium yttrium aluminium garnet emits light a bit further at 2940 nanometers. So different wavelengths, which lead to different absorption mechanisms in the materials, so the cleaning will be done a little bit differently. The Nd:YAG lasers are typically nanosecond pulse long, so they emit very short pulses of light in the nanosecond time range. And with this time domain, the pulses are usually long enough to be absorbed, and they are absorbed by the material, which leads to an increase in temperature, and the temperature is usually high enough to lead to vaporization of the materials and ejection of chunks of materials from the surface. So it is very efficient, but it can be a little bit brutal depending on the materials that you have. And the energy is usually dissipated as heat inside the materials, and then there can be effects from that, such as melting or shock waves. But it is a very efficient laser. I will show you in this very terrible video that still illustrates exactly what I just said. So this is a little ceramic lid that has dirt and adhesive on it, and I would like you to pay attention to this area here in the middle, which is where the adhesive is. So we apply the laser, you don't really see it, but it's doing something, and then there's going to be chunk just yeeted from the surface anytime now. Yep, there you go. So very effective to remove chunks of material from the surface. The AirYAG is a little bit different. The pulse duration is in microseconds, so it's a little bit longer, and the mechanism of ablation is still thermal, but most of the laser energy is absorbed by the OH groups in the materials. So it is very nice for organic materials that will absorb a lot, and ideally you want an inorganic material underneath that will not absorb. This is the ideal case. The interactions are generally quite shallow with this laser, so it's suitable for, generally people use it for thinning coatings instead of removing them entirely. So it is also not a laser that is used by itself. It is generally coupled with another cleaning method. So the laser will be used to weaken and disrupt the hardened top layers that can otherwise not be cleaned. And then there will be heating and vaporization of some of the material, and then you can apply a more gentle solvent or a more gentle cleaning method to thin the coating and get down this way. So it's a very different approach, a very gentle approach as well, and I'm going to illustrate how it works here on a micromosaic that has a yellowed coating and dirt on the surface. So the laser is applied on the surface, you don't really see anything, nothing seems to happen, but you are weakening and disrupting the organic on the surface in a very shallow depth. And then you can take a gentle solvent and remove it from the surface. So it's not very visible here, but you'll see that there is dirt on the swab. So the Nd:YAGs are the most commonly used lasers in conservation. They have been used on everything you can think of. In contrast, the AirYAG lasers have received less attention for a few different reasons. but there are still a few very successful examples on a range of materials. For example, removal of adhesives, removal of old varnishes from paintings, which was one of the reasons why these lasers were so attractive. Removal of bronze paint from gilded frames, stuff like that. And removal of biological growth or dirt from stone materials as well. So the goals for the year were specifically to explore the use of area lasers on materials from the collection to explore conservation challenges and make it practical for conservators. So we didn't want to do research in our heritage scientist corner. We wanted to involve the conservators and see what kind of problems they face and try to answer it, if possible, with laser, or show that sometimes laser didn't work in those cases. And then encourage the use of lasers in the department in general through training and seminars. Yes. So today I will mainly talk about the research projects that we did with the conservators. I will present the 2 big ones and then 3 smaller ones, but this is just keep in mind that it's a summary of the things that we did. So the first thing we looked at was laser cleaning of plastics, and I did that with Nora Brockman, who is a textiles conservator, and Brenda Kennigan, who is a heritage specialist and specialized in modern materials. So this is a very interesting one to start because cleaning of plastics is challenging, and plastics are difficult materials. They don't like solvents, they don't really like being touched, and they age very poorly. And then applying lasers on them is even more challenging because those plastics don't like heat. So on paper, laser cleaning of plastics doesn't sound very promising, but there is still some interest in finding an alternative conservation methods for plastics because in some cases otherwise nothing is clean and they just leave them as they are. So we asked ourselves a few questions. What is the interaction mechanism with the lasers, although we kind of already know what it is? What are the best parameters to use during cleaning, and is cleaning even possible on those plastics? Is damage induced on the objects during cleaning, and if yes, how can we avoid that happening? So because that was the first project, I had the opportunity to work on plastic coupons that were not objects from the collection to get a feel for what the area laser does and see what we can do. So I used a range of plastics. Some of them we can find in heritage collections like PMMA or PVC, others not so much, but we still included them to have an overview of as much as we could. And then we did artificial aging of those coupons with tapes on them to get adhesive residues on the surfaces, which is a problem that many materials, I think, in conservation are faced with, not necessarily just plastics. So I put these coupons through hell with both lasers and had a look at what happened. Generally, we can say that the NdAg had very dramatic effects and that we found it unsuitable in most cases. With the area laser, there were mixed results. Some plastics were quite resistant, like nylon or PET. Some others were a little bit more sensitive, like PVC. But anyway, we irradiated them to see what was happening and find the best parameters to use during cleaning. And what do scientists love to do when they do research? Make tables. And make graphs. So I will not go through all of that. I will just let you know the main conclusions. But with the help of Ed Teppo, we did a bunch of analysis determining the melting points and the Vicat points and stuff like that. Anyway, the main mechanism of ablation or like cleaning is thermal. You're heating up the surfaces. Heat diffuses through the material, so it propagates. And the main challenge is that the temperature needs to be kept low to avoid damage. So overall, laser cleaning of plastics is a tough proposition, but let's go ahead and see what we obtain. The Textiles Conservation Studio at the V&A has, I want to say collection, but not a collection, let's say a set of old buttons that were gathered through the years Some of them are quite old, from the 60s, some even earlier than that. And they have aged, so there is dirt on them, sticky residues. Some of them have plasticizers that have leached on the surface. So there's a range of things that can be studied on them, and they are not part of the collection. So if things happen to them, it's okay. I investigated the polyester buttons quite extensively. You can see on this image here that there's white crystals on the surface, so we think it's some plasticizers that have come to the surface. And we applied the erbium laser on it to see what happens. It works quite well. This is not accelerated, it's in real time, I think, from memory. So most of it is removed fairly easily by the laser. You can see it on the image here. And then we found that it was possible to remove even more of that by swabbing very gently with minimal amount of water from the surface. So quite positive results. And then we had a look at what we did on those buttons under the microscope. Sometimes the damage was very obvious. We'll leave it as that. Sometimes the damage is not so obvious, and please believe me when I tell you that there is actually a melted spot on the image at the bottom. So we did optical microscopy, and then to go a little bit further, we also did scanning electron microscopy. And when we look at those surfaces, so it's just higher magnification for microscopy, we can see that the surface has actually melted. So there is a range of parameters that we can use that is safe for the buttons, and outside of these conditions, then damage can start to occur. So we have to be careful about the parameters that we use with the lasers. But still, we can obtain very good results when the right conditions are applied. So we applied the laser on a range of other materials. This is a kind of rubber button that had dirt on it. There's cellulose nitrate that also had dirt on it. And the best results were obtained for laser followed by a little swab of water. And I think the results look great. And we didn't have any damage under the microscope. Did the same thing for PMMA. So I don't exactly know what object it is. I think it's a nutcracker toy, anyway, plastic thing that was full of adhesive and sticky residues. And in this case, we applied the laser first. The laser turns the adhesive or residues white, and they can then just be scraped off very gently, swabbed off very gently, with some isopropanol, which is okay for plastics in moderation. Now, I'm not a conservator, so I scratched the hell out of this PMMA. But it is still possible to clean PMMA without scratching it. We did do more tests, being more gentle with the swabs, and didn't get any scratching. So again, another thing to think about. But the laser worked really well to disrupt and weaken the adhesive that could just then be removed fairly easily. And we did the same on PVC. Now, PVC is a tricky one because when we did the coupons, we saw that it was very sensitive. But here it was, again, with these sticky residues. And again, the combination of laser with solvent worked extremely well. We didn't do any damage to the surface, so pretty good results. And I would just like to point out that this is all just to address the contaminants that are on the surface. It doesn't really address the cause of why those contaminants ended there. So again, this is something to think about. We're removing what's on the surface, but then what happens? Is it going to come back? Are we creating surfaces that are more reactive? So I think there is interest in having a look at what happens to them in the future after cleaning. Now, because my fellowship was only a year, we didn't do that, but for future research. There are things that worked a bit less well, so that was a stain on casein formaldehyde, and we were able to remove the strength of the stain but not remove it completely. That was cellulose acetate that was very, very damaged and had dirt on it, and as soon as we put the laser on, it melted, so I decided not to go further with that. For polyester that had the white crystals but kind of embedded in the surface, the laser and the cleaning did not do anything, so again, not very successful. And that's a very creepy polystyrene doll that had a stain on its head. And the laser softened the stain that could then be removed with a bit of isopropanol, but the solvent by itself performed as well. So, is laser cleaning possible on plastics? The very useful answer is sometimes yes, sometimes no. It really depends on what plastics and what's on them. Some of them are very sensitive, some of them are okay. Sometimes the benefit of using the laser is high, such as on adhesives. Sometimes it isn't so high, like removing stains. You're better off taking a solvent by itself. But anyway, this gives us an overview of what is possible and what is not possible on those materials. To summarize. The second project we looked at was laser cleaning of the micromosaics from the Rosalind and Arthur Gilbert collection. I did that with Carmen Vida, who is a sculpture conservator. And this is one of my favorite images of the micromosaics. It is a very, very tiny goat. And I will show you later where it comes from. The Gilbert collection of micromosaics is the most extensive collection of micromosaics in the world, with over 240 objects. It is a collection of decorative arts, and it contains a range of objects, so vases, tabletops, boxes, jewelry, paintings. And so these micromosaics were initially fancy souvenirs that people will bring back as statement pieces, and very beautiful. But what is a micromosaic? It is similar to a mosaic, but not really. The materials are different, and the size is different. So you have a base material, which can be stone, metal, depends, on which they applied a putty, which is a kind of paste. And in this paste, they embedded by hand with tweezers little glass tiles that are a couple of millimeters wide, so like rice grain size, colored to form patterns or portraits or scenes or anything. They fill the gaps between the tiles with grouting, often colored to match the surroundings, and sealed the top with several layers of wax that they polished to make them very reflective and very nice. So those are extremely complex objects with a lot of different materials, but very beautiful. Now, they have aged, and there are some conservation issues with them. A lot of them have dirt that has accumulated on the surface. So instead of having this painting-like appearance, you have the little glass tiles that stick out individually. There are a lot of cracks and losses, so all around the little angels you can see some massive cracks. Past repairs that haven't aged very well, and yellowed coatings, so they just age and turn yellow, and then it kind of hides the colors and make it very dull. There's a few problems with cleaning those objects. The first one is that intense mechanical action during cleaning can lead to additional losses. So you can imagine if you're scrubbing the surface, those little rice grains can just pop out, and we don't want that. If you're cleaning a tabletop that's 1 meter wide, you can imagine how this would take a lot of time. And the putty and the grouting, so the stuff between the tiles and under the tiles, is sensitive to most solvents. So we don't really want to put solvents on the materials to protect them. So can the area laser address those challenges, and can we clean the micromosaics with laser? So we were really lucky that we had access to a non-displayable object that was broken in the corner and had a sample with all the different materials accessible. This is a very lucky case. Most cases we don't have samples to do tests on, and we have to test on the actual object, and I'll show you how to address that on another project. Anyway, we had access to all the materials, so the putty under, the glass tiles, and the grouting between them. So we applied the laser on it. These are scanning electron microscope images of the different materials, and what we see is basically that different materials react differently. So the glass tiles were absolutely fine. It's the two top pictures. Now, they might look a bit different to you, but they are the same. Nothing has changed. It's just I didn't use the same voltage for both images. The grouting, so the material between the tiles, was not affected either. However, the putty, so the stuff under, was very sensitive and was damaged almost instantly. So that shows us different sensitivities and also tells us that if we have objects that maybe have holes in them, we have to be very careful and maybe not put the laser on these holes. But knowing this information, we then went on with more cleaning. So the conservator tried different solvents to get the best combination of laser and solvent. It might not be very visible here, but we did the cleaning in the red area and it reduces the dirt quite significantly. But it might be more obvious here on the microscope images. So you've got before, you've got laser and solvent, and we compared it to solvent only to see if the laser was actually doing something. And the answer is yes, it does. It removes the dirt without affecting the little pigment grains that are in between. So all of these little things in between are little pigments that we don't want to remove. And so you can see that the laser did not remove them. And also that it made it more homogeneous than if you apply the solvent only. So great results for the combination of laser and solvent, effective cleaning and preservation of the materials. So we applied that on a real object. This is a little box. Again, it's not very big. It's less than 10 centimeter in diameter. And this is what it looks like. Apply the laser on the surface. This was still pretty early on, so we had a small spot diameter and a very low repetition rate. So it's fairly slow, and as we got more comfortable, we sped it up. But at the beginning, we took it very slowly to see what we were doing. Doesn't seem like anything is happening, but it is happening. And then with the swab, you can see the dirt just dissolving away. It's a very crappy video, so you have the image on the right. I have to say that this year I discovered that I didn't take very good videos. So it was a very successful object, and then the conservator came with a much bigger object. She decided that we needed to clean this absolutely huge tabletop, which is about 1 meter wide, very heavy, that shows different cities in Italy. So on the image on the right, on the far right side, you can see the Milan Duomo, for example. So all this with 2 millimeter wide little tiles. So you can imagine how long it would have taken them to make that. Anyway, this table was very dirty, especially the sky area in the middle. The coatings were very badly yellowed. There were cracks, especially, like you can see the concentric cracks. And there were a few losses, so areas where the tiles have come out. So we did a bunch of tests to see what combination would work best. Now, you don't need to remember all of this, but we tested different solvent combinations to see what would happen and found that the best combination was slightly pre-wetting the surface with benzyl alcohol, then applying the laser at relatively low energy, and then swabbing again. These are a few before and after images. It's a little bit difficult to tell, but I think on the bottom you can see better that a bunch of dirt has been removed. And then we saw something else. It's not super obvious, but after spending a lot of time on these objects, you kind of see it, especially on the right side pictures. The images were very dull and there was no effect of perspective, whereas after cleaning you get this impression of depth again. So we were very pleased with those outcomes. And you also reduced greatly the intensity of the mechanical action. So you don't need to scrub. It's very, very gentle on the surface and a very tiny amount of solvents that was needed. After that, we decided to check what we had done on the surface just to make sure that nothing bad had happened with this awesome bit of kit, which is a microscope that instead of having the object taken to the microscope, you take the microscope to the object. And these are some images that we published in the publication. So at the top you can see before and after, and there's a lot of dirt that was removed and this impression of yellow that was removed as well, and all the little pigments are still there. And still at the bottom, it's still nice and blue, just without the dirt. So great results, increased efficiency of treatment, especially on a big object like this, reduced amount of solvent and generally safe for the materials, no sign of damage on all the different spots that we tested. So then Carmen came up with an even bigger table. This time showed the flora of Sicily's, so very pretty table showing nature and different scenes, which is where the goat comes from. Now you can see the goat was about 2 centimeters wide on a table that's 106 centimeters in diameter, so a very tiny goat. And I've just put some images before and after, and I think it's quite impressive to see how well everything was removed. And just a few more images. So we worked in sections. We did 5 by 5 or 10 by 10 centimeter areas to get the laser solvent process done. So it was still a long project, but we got the entire table done in maybe a couple of weeks. So it was a very successful project. We cleaned various objects, not just those 3 or 4 that I showed you, there were more of them. We achieved removal of dirt and of the yellowing and reduction of the amount of solvent and of mechanical action, which is everything we wanted. And the results were published in a publication if you're interested. And then we went on something even more difficult, laser cleaning of paintings with Nina Jimenez-Gray, who's a paintings conservator. So I didn't think I would put a laser on a painting, but here we are. The painting was the hay cart, or the effect of dawn or twilight, which is a 19th century oil painting on paper laid on oak panel. And it is very dark and it's not looking its best. And the cleaning has been challenging because generally the solvents that they tried on it removed the varnish, but also removed the paint underneath. So they kind of stopped and didn't try to clean it more than that. So we were wondering if the laser would help remove the varnish without removing the paint underneath. And to do that, we had to look under UV light. So the varnish is in green. So you can see that it's very patchy. There's areas where they've actually removed it, like on the horse's head or on the left. And there's areas where it's still really thick, different thicknesses as well throughout the painting to make it easier. Some areas where it's cracked and some areas where there's even bubbles like here. So the thing has started to come up. So just a few challenges. So this is one of the objects where we don't have any samples, and if we do anything bad, it's going to come up very quickly and very obviously. So the approach in these cases is to take it as low as possible and as slow as possible and slowly increase it until preferably before you start seeing things happening, because generally if you start seeing them, it's too late. So we applied the laser in different areas with different fluence, different energies and different combinations of solvent and laser. And generally found that it worked really well. So with the help of Ed, we had indications on what kind of cleaning window we could expect. So what kind of parameters were sure to give us some damage and what would probably be fine. So we used that as a guide to go ahead. So yeah, found that the laser was quite successful and then ran into some issues. This is what it looks like when you apply the laser on the surface. It is normal that it goes white, this is not the problem. The problem is that it is very uneven. You can see very poorly, but you can see that there's some structure on the surface and that there's spots that seem to be white and some spots that are not white. And this is due to the structure of the beam with concentric rings, which make it very difficult to scan homogeneously and to have a very homogeneous surface. So there's spots of varnish, there's spots where the varnish is left and spots where the varnish has been removed, which make it even harder for cleaning. So we were quite lucky to have access to a beam homogenizer. Now I will summarize very briefly what a beam homogenizer is. It is an optical element that basically redistributes the energy of your laser and makes the output smoother. I will leave it as that. And we were able to use one that colleagues from the National Trust in London were using, so we could do tests on that. And then we were even luckier to have Ed make a custom-made, a custom beam homogenizer for this specific laser, which made it much nicer. We were able to then have a homogeneous scanning of the surface and not have tiny patches. So the entire painting was cleaned with the laser. The varnish was removed very well. We didn't remove any of the varnish was solubilized, but the paint layer remained and was not solubilized. And we were able to use a combination of solvents that was way milder than what would have been used without the laser. So overall, very successful. And cleaning was carried out on the entire painting with the beam homogenizer, but at this point I had already left. But I was told it was very successful. We did other smaller projects, for example, this Roman mosaic, a very old mosaic that had dirt and wax on the surface, so the dirt needed to be removed. We applied the laser on the surface, and we were a bit worried because it's quite colorful, and we were worried about getting discolorations, because on some colored stones sometimes you can get discolorations. There were no discolorations, and the laser gave really good results and no damage, but then the conservator decided to clean it with solvent instead, because solvents worked as well. And this also shows that, yes, the lasers might work in some cases, but it's just one more tool in the toolbox of conservators, and you don't need to use the laser for everything. It is generally very good for cases where you can't apply anything else because you have challenges that can't be overcome. Then yes, lasers is great, but in some cases, just use solvents. Then we had a look at the removal of adhesive from a ceramic vase. So you can see on the pictures, there's all these little dots there of orange adhesive, and cleaning would otherwise be done by scraping it with solvent and potentially a scalpel or something like that, so not ideal. So the British Museum has done some work on the removal of adhesive, so we applied what they did and got extremely good results, very quick, very efficient, and no damage to the surface. Now, you can see that there is still a little bit of residues left on the edges because it was very small and it was a very strange geometry because it had been broken. You had this lip that kind of went up. So we took as much as we could off and it looked much better after. So not perfect, but pretty good. So that kind of concludes the projects that we did. I will mention that we did some training for the staff, especially with the Nd:YAG laser. We got Martin Cooper to do a training session. So he's the guy who sells the Nd:YAG lasers. So who better than him to do the training on the Nd:YAG lasers? And the idea was to give staff the knowledge for this specific type of laser. So we did all the work with the AirYAG during the year and then had a session on the Nd:YAG as well that are a bit more dangerous and a little bit trickier and less forgiving sometimes. And it just opened new avenues for staff for future projects or future laser endeavors. So on the left, there is Barbara Borges, and she was investigating the removal of adhesives from paper. That seemed to work quite well. There is the removal of dirt or adhesive from the ceramic lid, which I've shown you before, and then removal of dirt from ivory, which worked extremely well. So again, just to give them an idea of what can be done and try to encourage the use of lasers for different things in the collections. So in terms of other outcomes, there were a lot of reports written. So sort of highlights of what worked and what didn't to guide conservators if they want to pick up there, and also lots of procedures to how to use the laser, how to train staff, this kind of boring things. The stuff on the micromosaic got picked up and we did a piece in the Icon Journal. We are going, not me, but we are going to attend a conference in Munich for the plastics and are still hoping to get a publication done on that. And we did a publication on the micromosaics, and actually some stuff from the micromosaics is going to go into a blog post that will then be used for the new labels of the refurbished galleries. So there's still a little bit of work going on with them, but such is research. So yes, I would like to thank a few people. Ed and Anne Tepper for the donation of the laser and also funding my position and all the guidance that they provided during the year. Lucia Borgio, who was my supervisor and sounding board. Pedro Gaspar for the opportunity, and then all the conservation team who came up with the ideas and kept me busy for a year. So, and also thank you for your attention. I hope that was, after lunch, not too tiring. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to ask them now or just
Thanks very much, Julia. Would anyone like to kick us off? Comments or questions?
Thanks, Julia. That was awesome. Lots of pretty pictures and great stuff. I was interested in how much evaluation had been done on traditional cleaning methods as opposed to the evaluation you did on the laser cleaning, because I think sometimes a new method gets evaluated much more closely than an older method.
We tried to compare the laser to what would otherwise be done in all the projects that we did. So for the plastics, I'd try solvent only and compare it to laser cleaning plus that. So probably a little bit of like observations and a bit of microscopy in all the projects that we did. So not as extensive as the laser cleaning, because for laser cleaning we really go have a look for the damage kind of. So definitely not as extensive with the other conventional methods, but just a comparison of both generally.
Okay, Rocco.
Thanks for that. It was fascinating. 2 questions. 1, the relative costs of this versus other methods. And 2, if there was any specific lessons for Indigenous rock art that came out of your work.
The price, I don't necessarily know exactly. It depends on what laser you get. I think you can get away with 50,000 Australian dollars for a decent system. It is an investment because that's just the laser, and then you need to consider all the costs like the extraction system so you don't breathe in the fumes and having a dedicated space. So it's definitely an investment, which is why I think today it's mainly big institutions who can afford this kind of things, but it is getting cheaper as the technology gets cheaper. So I think the prices will eventually go down. And in terms of how it links to Aboriginal rock art, I mean, it is very different topics, but it's good to know how to work with different people who are not necessarily scientists. So the conservators didn't necessarily know about laser cleaning, so I had to find ways to approach it in a way that they would understand and also in a way that they would actually use. So yeah, working with people with different backgrounds and then working probably with fragile materials. So this is a very different approach to what I did during my PhD, because during my PhD we did damage and then had to look at how to avoid it. Whereas here you don't want to do damage and you want to be as gentle as possible on the materials. So I think these kind of approaches could be used here.
Thanks, that was great. I just wonder if you'd say a little bit about the micromosaics. I think you said in the multiple layers that the top layer is a wax. So when you're cleaning, you lose the wax. Is there a sort of practice, or you can lose the wax, is there a practice of re-waxing the micromosaics, or how does the conservation work? Thanks.
So yeah, there's several layers of wax and we don't really know the history of the objects. So we know that the bottom layers are like pigmented and we want to keep that, but sometimes the top layer is just really yellowed and has deteriorated. So in some cases we did remove the wax, and in those cases the conservator re-waxed it, but those were very few instances. We tried to remove as little as possible. It was mainly targeted at the dirt and some of the yellowing. Yeah, so some re-waxing, but minor.
Thanks, Julia. That was just marvellous. And I'm a little jealous because I think the V&A is one of my favourite places in the world by orders of magnitude. So I'm very jealous of your opportunity, and congratulations for taking it, taking your chances. The erbium-doped YAG lasers are now used on humans all the time. That's what you go to your laser clinic to get your little wrinkles sorted out or get hair removed or spots removed. So it clearly is human safe. As well, with intolerances, but humans have a resilience and a rebuilding capacity. But it's really interesting to see it used for conservation techniques. The question that came up was more just a technical question because you obviously got much steadier and more stable hands than me, because I'd be going like this and I'd be delivering different pulses of energy or different amounts of energy at times. And I thought you'd probably want to take some of the human element out of that as to how to do that. And the second question came up was, we're pretty limited by our paltry or my paltry senses. I can't see quite as well, particularly through glasses, when doing stuff like that. So to scan the image and then use some AI to work out clusters of where varnish is and stuff like that. And then I don't know what the verb is, but to roboticize it in the sense of putting an algorithm in that would only apply different energies at different places. Just seemed like the next step of what seems like a really exciting idea.
Thank you. Yes, so for the having a steady hand part, it's actually a really good point. I do not have a steady hand, so yeah. But this laser in particular, the Photona, is really well built in the sense that the distance at which you are doesn't really influence the energy that is delivered. Don't ask me about how it works. I think it's just in the focusing optics that they use. But anyway, you can be at 1 centimeter or 10 centimeter and the energy will be pretty much the same. So it is a really, really good tool in those cases because you can change the height and it will still be okay. It is not the case for the other lasers, and in those cases it is much harder to keep a steady hand. Thinking specifically about the Nd:YAG, but then with the Nd:YAG there's other clues that you can use. So for example, they use the noises that it makes. So depending on the distance, it will make a different noise, and it will make a certain noise on the dirt, and then when you reach the surface it will change noise, so you know that you need to stop or that you're too close. So they can use stuff like that, but it's one thing that we haven't figured out entirely yet. And for the second point, which was algorithm and scanning of the surface, yes, but I think it's really difficult in conservation because everything changes from one object to the other. So yes, having the surface scanned and the laser applied the right energy where it needs would be amazing, but I don't think it can be applied because a lot of the decisions rely on the appreciation of the person who does it. So when to stop. Maybe I need to insist more here. So I don't know how this would go with automation, but it is kind of what we're also aiming for in Alison's ARC project. A big part of it is including all the robotization and the decision making within conservation. I don't really know how to approach this, but it is part of the ARC. So if you want to have a chat with Alison and I afterwards, we can do that.
Hi. Well done, Julia. Great to hear about the project, and I'm delighted to have you back with us. Thank you, Alison, for making that possible. I'm going to follow that thread of the person and so I'm interested in you kind of touched on this before, but on the ways in which people were interested, the conservators and people from other backgrounds, in actually engaging with the lasers and how you worked with that diverse team. And obviously that's something you're going to continue on the ARC project, but were people open to it? Were they more likely to, if they thought solvents were going to be just as good, were they more likely just to go with that? Like, what was the hat and how did you engage across those diverse backgrounds?
Yes, some people were very open to it, some a bit less, some were scared. So I think the conservators were generally excited to have something else that they can use and learn. So we did a bunch of seminars on what lasers can and cannot do, just to give them, ideas of what can happen and see if it sparks some things. So the conservators, I think, were generally very excited. We got some curators that were a bit less excited, especially with paintings, because things can happen pretty badly. But in those cases, then we just explain how things work, what has been done, and what are the risks, but how we try to manage them and stuff like that. So I think even if some people were a bit scared at the beginning, then explaining to them and talking to them generally changed the conversation, and I think people were generally excited.
Great, thank you. And I guess that part of the investment is not just the technology, but actually bringing people along, right? And how you do that, which is a difficult thing to cost sometimes. Thanks, Julia. Thanks, Paul.
Julia, I just want to ask you maybe a bit of a simple question, but it has to do with objects and time. So stepping outside of conservation per se, is this basically just what happens to the things all around us, that they gather all materials and they start to kind of rot? Is it a fantasy that objects are kind of resistant to, I don't know, history, change, adhesives?
Maybe that they can rot is a bit extreme. It takes time for objects to age and accumulate dirt. The plastics, so the buttons were 50, 60, 70 years old, which is more than their expected lifespan as well. The micromosaics are 200 years old, and they've been on display for years and years. So, they do age and they do get dirt on them, but I think it's gradual and not that quick. Except if you get a fire, then you've soot deposited within a day. I think it depends what is on the surface. The adhesives take time. On the artificial aging that we did, we simulated 80 years in a museum, so it's gradual, it takes time, I think, is my answer. I hope I haven't said anything stupid from the conservation point of view. I will point out that I'm not a conservator, but yeah.
Sure, it just makes me think that objects have lives.
They kind of do.
Yeah. Any final questions or comments? Fee.
Yeah, I was curious. You were talking about the Roman mosaic, the Pliny, and you were saying that you found that, you could use the air glazer or you could use solvents quite happily. It made me wonder, in terms of the humans that are working with these objects in conservation and, using solvents and that kind of exposure, whether the human cost of working with solvents ends up being higher than the cost of running the air glazer.
I'm not sure I understand.
So my thinking is that when you're working with solvents all the time, they're toxic materials and you're breathing them in, you're exposed to them. It may be the air glazer at the moment is more expensive to run and maintain, but whether there's an argument that can be made for the health and well-being of conservators in using the...
Okay. Thank you for rephrasing. It's actually not that simple, because the fumes from the laser are very toxic and you do not want to breathe it in, especially if you're using solvents with it as well. So there is the additional cost with laser cleaning of the extraction system that you need, or masks that you need to wear. So that's one thing to think about. However, I will say that the waste management when laser cleaning is easier. Because you don't have all these things contaminated with solvent, and the amount is reduced. Or if you do sandblasting, you'll have tons of sand, which you won't have if you're doing laser cleaning. So I think it's different considerations. I wouldn't say that it's safer to do laser cleaning because of those fumes and all the things that come from it, but it's a different way to proceed.
Okay, and a last comment or question from Alison.
I'd just like to add to that, those are really valid points. Ecologically, I think, in terms of the environment, I think it's probably better because you don't have the upstream environmental cost of making those chemicals, and you don't, as Julia said, have nearly so much downstream cost in terms of how you dispose of them. So I think in that sense it's safer.
You do have the energy that is needed to run the laser, so that's another thing to consider, but I guess nothing is perfect.
And that's electricity anyway, so you can actually do it through renewables.
Okay. We're going to call it a day there. Thanks so much, Julia.
Thank you.